that it was a known firmware error. Whether it was before as well, who knows. I'm still glad I went ahead and upgraded all of the cable covers regardless. It did end up taking a couple of firmware update tests to fully fix the issue, which did unfortunately result in a couple of costly misprints for me. But I am very happy to say that it seems like the newest firmware update has completely resolved the issue, because from this point on in the video, that is what I've had my XL running on, and I've never had that error pop up again. Unfortunate that these issues happened, and it definitely was testing my sanity for a few weeks there, but I always want to give you all an authentic look at what goes into these projects, because it doesn't always go right. And I do also have to say, it did take a bit for me to fully get my trust back with this machine. I mean, it was like playing Russian roulette as to if there was going to be some sort of connector issue or error pop up, but now I do feel like fully comfortable and trusting this printer again. That update really seemed to have done the trick, and do keep in mind, this is literally hundreds of hours of print time that you're seeing in this video. I was really trying to run this machine like 24/7 if I possibly could, and try and line up the print job so that I could have it running all overnight and then be able to flip it to something new in the morning. Also, just to mention, all of these prints were with a 0.4 nozzle at 0.2mm layer heights, other than the hand pieces. Something to keep in mind with multicolor printing, the parts will use more filament and be heavier due to the color changes than if it was printed in a single color. You can see in the slicer preview how the printer adds extra internal walls where the various colors meet. Thankfully, for the most part, this wasn't an issue for this droid, but the head ended up being about twice as heavy as I was expecting it to be, and I was a bit worried the neck pieces weren't going to be able to support it, which is exactly why I did some stress tests on the neck parts. These were the originals, and as you can see, I could break it pretty easily where the color change happened. I ended up just reprinting them in a single color for strength. Thankfully for this back bent piece, I could slice the connector parts off and print those in a different filament to pretty much give me the same effect as the original multicolor version. And finally, after 2 months of pretty consistent 3D printing, I had all of this droid's parts printed, which means we can start working on assembly. But first it was on to support removal, because I didn't actually deal with any of the support structures on these prints as I was printing them, so did all of that at once, and overall these supports came off super easily on all of the pieces. The only part that I really had any difficulty with was the head. For some reason the machine seemed to have printed this like way too close to the build plate, and you can probably see that in the silver filament, and that meant the first layer between the head and the support material was like completely squished and melted together, so that was fun. But now on to the actual assembly process. We need to start with parts that I haven't even had a chance to mention yet, and those are the base pieces. For these I went with the Prusament Galaxy Black filament, again another one of my favorites. It's this matte black with some sparkle to it, and it always prints with basically invisible layer lines, and I also thought it would give like a really interesting almost wrought iron effect for this display base. There are some printable dowels to line up these parts, and then I'm just using the super glue to assemble everything. There is a 1-inch pole needed to go into the center of this base, and then from there you can start adding on the pieces. Most of these parts were just held together by dowels. I didn't actually bother gluing anything together. It was a nice snug fit as is. It's going to be held together by its own weight, and it also gives me the opportunity to disassemble this if I need to ever transport it anywhere. I had to take the ring and this main body part off because I could not get them to line up, but after that it was all good. The next piece to attach was the torso piece, which I haven't even had a chance to mention. I had to split because this thing was too tall for the printer. It was the only part that wouldn't fit in one piece, and I felt that the angle I split it at would be the least obvious when assembled. And the torso just slides onto some rails that are part of the main body. Next was onto the shoulder piece, which had quite a lot of parts I wanted to attach to it before adding it onto the rest of the body. Starting with these cuff parts. Again, these just were attached using some dowels that are printable, and I super glued those into place. Then it was on to a whole lot of neck parts, starting with the outermost bracket pieces. The rest of the parts go together using a couple of bolts so that they're pulsable later.
No, I know, but
And there are a lot of neck pieces on this droid. You have the outer brackets, then there's these discs, then the middle bent piece, and then the same on the other side, and just gradually adding them and using the bolt to hold them all in place. And same sort of idea for the top part of the neck. And here's what that whole crazy contraption looked like put together. Next it was on to the arms. Starting with the upper arms, these again are held together by a couple of specific dowels that are are printed, and some super glue of course, and there are 2 of those. Same idea with the 4 arms, some specific dowels for those pieces, some super glue, and then they just fit together really securely like that. The arm design on both parts actually does a pretty good job at hiding the seam between the pieces. It looks more like a panel line than a joint. Next was onto the hands, starting with the palms and removing the support material there. These were the one part that I changed the print orientation on because I knew if I printed them straight up and down it would give a better effect. The fingers I also needed to remove the support material for. I used organic support on those pieces that I separated for ease of printing this as a solid piece in color. And then there seems to be about a million of these little mouth detail parts to glue in. Realistically, I think there only ended up actually being about 12 plus a central mouth piece. There's definitely not a shortage in terms of the small parts and details that have to be assembled onto the head, but it does give an incredibly impressive end result, as well as just being a whole lot easier and cleaner to print when they are all separate parts. The 3 separate bars then get glued into recessed sections that are on the bottom of the main head, and then there are a couple of greebly details to glue onto the top of the dome. Next is onto working on the eyes. I printed the lenses in some clear resin, same with the body light buttons, but we'll get to those in a bit. And after cleaning the lenses up and trying to polish them up as best I could, I coated the inside of them with this translucent Maya color called Smoke. It's basically translucent black. Did a few coats of that to try and build up the darkness of the lens. And once that had dried, I then applied a clear gloss to the outside of the lens to really try and sell this as if it was like welded fiber, which is typically used as a material for lenses like this. And I really did slap the gloss on to try and give it as flawless of a finish as I could without having to pull out my airbrush. Once those were dried, I then snapped them into place into the eye and then glued all of those onto the main part of the head. As for the body light lenses, I used a similar method, this time using some clear red applied to the backs of these buttons. This was really a massive experiment because I knew I really couldn't be bothered with actually adding LEDs behind these, so I wanted to try this technique using this reflective tape. This is the same stuff that the Jedi training remote really used to give it that light up effect, and I tried applying these lights onto the tape using some glue. This glue really didn't like stick, so I changed the glues, and ultimately I'm not sure if in the end you can really even get the reflective finish through these buttons, but it doesn't look terrible, and so I went ahead and applied those anyway. I used the adhesive from the tape, so they're going to be easily removed if I want to change them later. Now it is on to the final assembly of the rest of these droid parts. This back brace kind of slides into the main torso, and then there's also this back cover that slides in underneath that. This U-shaped cover that sits underneath that back brace. And then the shoulder and arm assembly just sits on top of the torso, and then finally the head can be added on top of that. There's also a couple of antennas I decided to add that use that same 4mm aluminum rod like the hands use. And here is the finished Squire droid, who still very much needs a name, so please leave your suggestions in the comments. But now onto the part that I'm sure a lot of you are curious about. Just how much waste and filament in general went into printing this droid. Starting with the waste, all of the white towers combined equaled 597 grams of filament, which honestly isn't as bad as I thought it might have been. I did end up having the first few purge towers printing a lot more dense than they probably needed to be. I figured out how to lower the prime volume so that it would end up wiping less filament. Had I thought of that and done that at the beginning, I could have maybe saved 100 or so grams there. So, for such a large project, under 600 grams of filament, while yes, it is waste, is still a significant improvement compared to what we will be talking about in a reprinted, and again, that was of course me not holding back whatsoever in terms of coloring this droid. So in some cases, the parts were switching colors like 4 times for every layer for a few hundred layers, which is why the prime towers or white towers ended up being more dense for some of the parts. Now there were of course a few misprints along the way, and I thought it only fair that I weigh those out well. Assuming I didn't accidentally throw something out, the misprints equaled about 3.4 kilograms of filament. So obviously not ideal. The majority of it ended up being the torso pieces that I was using to troubleshoot the issues that I was having. So they did get reprinted and canceled quite a few times for me to try and figure out what the problems were. And then I had those extruder errors happen on literally the single largest piece on this entire droid, and then when it messed up a very large print on me. So that is how we ended up with 3.4 kilograms of misprint. So the droid itself, that came out to a grand total of about 6.8 kilograms with an extra 800 grams for the base. And that's including the support material needed to print the various parts. I don't typically, so obviously not ideal. The majority of it ended up being the torso pieces that I was using to troubleshoot the issues that I was having. So they did get reprinted and canceled quite a few times for me to try and figure out what the problems were. And then I had those extruder errors happen on literally the single largest piece on this entire droid, and then when it messed up a very large print on me. So that is how we ended up with 3.4 kilograms of misprint. So the droid itself, that came out to a grand total of about 6.8 kilograms with an extra 800 grams for the base. And that's including the support material needed to print the various parts. I don't typically put in the support material into the waste category of things, just because regardless of whether you are printing this droid in 1 color or 5 colors, you're going to need that same amount of support material. So for me, the waste is a separate category of what additional filament is going to end up being used when you are deciding to look at printing this in color. Even though yes, technically the support material in most cases ends up being waste as well, unless you're printing in ABS or ASA, and you can recycle that and turn that into some ABS slurry. Also, according to the slicer, it estimated that it should have taken about 288 hours or 12 straight days of printing to complete everything. I know some of the larger pieces ended up taking hours longer than the slicer had estimated, so I would say that 288 hours is probably
Did you know that your 3D printer is a piece of art? This isn't some sort of riddle. Go take a look at your printer. Look at all the curves, all the straight pieces. Take a look at how it looks industrial but also homely at the same time. But you might be looked at a little bit weird if you go and slap your 3D printer on the wall as a decoration. Thankfully, 3D printers can print out decorations that you can't slap on the wall, and instead of getting looked at weirdly, people are going to ask you where you got them from and how many thousands of dollars you paid for a modern art piece when really it only cost you 22 cents to go and build it. Today, I'm going to show you the coolest 3D printed art pieces that coincidentally